When I was not so much older than you, when I was about 23, I went to South Africa for the first time. Hadn't had any family from there, had never been. It was a country that the world was paying more and more attention to. Apartheid was the rule of the country. That meant that the vast majority of the country, African by descent, had no rights whatsoever. They couldn't vote, they couldn't live where they wanted to, they couldn't have certain jobs. It was the most institutionalized form of racism that the world has ever seen. And as a student, I was concerned about that. We were all concerned about that. But I'd never been, so I went. Found my way over. Again, just to give you a sense of the timing of the 1980s, Nelson Mandela had been in jail for 21 years. You could see the island offshore where he was kept, and that was as close as you could get. We had no idea whether he would be released, whether there would be a bloodbath, whether apartheid would continue, whether democracy would be achieved. We knew that the country by then was starting to blow up into a civil war. And I worked for an education group. And education was something that particularly students were focused on in South Africa because the schools for the majority of South Africans were purposefully kept awful. 50, 60 students in a classroom, no electricity, no chalkboards. In those days, certainly no computers. Teachers who didn't have qualifications, none of the things that in a great school like this, you know you're going to get. The students were hitting the streets and demanding better education. The state was not going to give it to them because they understood that keeping the majority of people down, one of the ways to do that is to lower their possibilities and expectations. Giving purposefully terrible education was crucial to that. The universities in South Africa were almost all white, not surprisingly, because they said they couldn't find black students who could do that level of work. This seemed like a continued trap for South Africa. And so the group that I worked for decided, why don't we try a solution? Let's create a school and take students, mostly African students, and give them just 1 year of high-quality education. Just 1 year of something really great, and see what difference it can make. So we set about creating up this school, and I remember the day when I was in the building where we would house it, and I was sanding the floor to get ready for opening of the school. I recommend doing that kind of work. And in walked a young man. His name was Musa, introduced himself. He had just sort of wandered through, said, he was tired of not finding the opportunities that he wanted, and he saw his family trapped, living in Soweto, no prospects at all, because South Africa designed a reality with no prospects. He rolled up his sleeves and helped me do the work. He was better at it than I was. And he enrolled in the school. It was later called Kanya College, meaning place of enlightenment. And he spent a year doing university-level work with great teachers and other great students, living together and helping each other. When the year was done, he applied to university, got into one of the great universities of South Africa, went on to a career, some in journalism, some in business. He's now a deputy to a minister of state in South Africa. He is, I believe, on a track to become the equivalent of a secretary of state for the entire country of South Africa. And Musa was only one of about 1,000 students who went through that through that school. So let me tell you the lesson that Musa taught me. The lesson Musa taught me is that even just 1 year of great education can undo the purposefully terrible and terrifying effects of 12 or 14 years of terrible education. For those students that year, the school went on for about 7 or 8 years until democracy came to South Africa. That intervention, that engagement by them and by great teachers, turned their lives around. The universities that said we can't find students for the places because they won't be able to do the work because they've been trained not to be able to do the work, they found great students, great graduates that are now making them proud. So the lesson from Musa, first lesson. Don't believe the argument that damage cannot be undone, that the track that you're on that isn't getting you where you want to get, or the barriers that have been seemingly purposefully put in front of you can't be overcome. Talent is more powerful than that. Your smarts are more powerful than that. The power of educators and education is way more powerful than that. That's why the students of South Africa were willing to risk their lives to get quality education, because they knew in a way that we as professionals didn't, that they just needed that chance. So fast forward 30 years. I'd written about South Africa, been a professor, stayed involved, pretty much minded my own business, and then found myself, much to my surprise, the president of Amherst College, about an hour north of here. It was a surprise. I didn't have any of the qualifications that you're supposed to have for that job. Trust me. When I arrived, so a couple quick facts about Amherst College. It's the most selective liberal arts college in America. It's impossible to get into. It just is. It's ridiculous. And it's almost 200 years old, had about $2 billion in the bank, and for a very long time, it had done a very fine job of educating lots of white, rich folks. Not only, but in the vast majority. And when we got to Amherst, again, in part because of the experiences I'd had in South Africa and what was happening in the world, we all looked at each other and said, maybe we can do better than this. These are great students, great education, we've got all these resources. Is there more that we can do? And I confess there was probably a little bit of politics mixed in, a sense that in America, social mobility, the American dream was not working, is not working for too many of us. And that one of the ways in which it's not working is that the pipeline, the way to get to the great universities and colleges that can open up so many opportunities seem blocked. Not maybe as purposefully or as legally as under apartheid, but pretty powerfully. I'll leave it to you to decide whether it's better or worse if that's the outcome that is purposeful or not. But its impact is real. And so we said, what more can we do? And we set about to do that. One of the things we decided was we sort of looked at the world of education and we noticed how compartmentalized it is. we noticed that half of the students in America in higher education are in community colleges. That something like 87% of them go to community colleges as a way to get their associate's degree in the expectation of continuing to a bachelor's degree, and that something like 12% manage to do so, even just to make the transition, let alone to finish it, and certainly very few within 4 years. Segmented. Not apartheid, but apart institutions and tracks. And so we said to ourselves, in those colleges, there've got to be great talent that is hungering for the possibilities of what else they can do. So we went looking. Seemed like none of our peer institutions were looking at all. We found Isaac. Isaac had grown up in Portland. His family had had a rough time. He'd had to work really hard to help raise his brothers and sisters. He'd been very involved in sports, great football player in high school. Hadn't done all that great in school. Went on with the encouragement of a great teacher who saw a possibility to a community college nearby so that he can continue to help his family. And when he finished, he heard about this little college in New England that was looking for stars, and by then he had pulled himself up by his bootstraps in the old great American tradition and said, I'm going to have to work hard. And he absolutely blew that community college away because he knew that if he didn't, that was going to be the end of the line for him. So he was admitted to Amherst, and he came. I remember meeting him. He's pretty striking, hard to miss. And we chatted. The next thing I knew, he sent me a 6-page, single-spaced letter telling me what an idiot I am and how the college hadn't thought hard enough about how to make it possible for students who came from different backgrounds than it had historically had to succeed, to feel welcome, and to feel supported. He was absolutely right. We changed the policies of the college based on his insight. The next year, his last year, sadly, he was only there for 2 years, I was teaching a seminar, as I tried to do every year. He signed up, was on policies of higher education. He blew the class away, blew me away. And at the end of the year, I had decided to step down as president. And the most important task I knew ahead was to pick the next president. And I knew that there was one person on campus who would know how to do that. And couldn't have been more honored and delighted when Isaac was named the student on the search committee and helped to find the next, much better president of Amherst College. Isaac worked for a couple of years doing management consulting. He'll start law school in September, and this week he started working for me at the New York Public Library. Because I know, selfishly, talent is what you need. Smarts are what you need, and people who are willing to tell you reality. So, lesson from Isaac. 2, I'd say. 1, the tracks that you see being laid for you are for you to blow away. There are always opportunities where you don't see them. There are always people who want to help. But you have to help yourself first. You have to present yourself first. And the second lesson I'd say of Isaac is the impact of the Isaacs on a place like Amherst. This is a two-way street. The community college students who are now using most of the transfer spots at Amherst College have a higher GPA on average than the Amherst College students as a whole. It's basic math, right? You pick 20 or 30 students out of a million, you're going to find amazing students. People didn't believe that. People said, oh, you're going to lower standards, you're going to destroy the college. College got better. Better students, and here's lesson number 2, better education for everyone. Because arguing about the policies of higher education and the possibilities of access to it with students in the room who had lived that experience meant that every one of us learned more when we sat down and wrestled with the hard issues. And Amherst College, which is today minority white American, meaning the majority of students at the most selective college in America are what are called minority, though increasingly majority students in America, and international students also on financial aid. 3 times as many students who come from the low end of the economy. Better college for everyone. So, don't let the barriers get in your way. They're there for you to find your way through. Don't let people tell you that if it hasn't worked this far, it can't work beyond it. If Musa could overcome apartheid education, anybody in America can overcome anything. If 1 year of quality education can undo 12 years of apartheid education, it's all possible. And we all as a society will benefit from doing this together, because this is the secret strength of this country. Thanks.